All right, we're dialed. Welcome back, Libby. Good to have you again.
Hi, happy to be here.
Okay, so we're gonna get right into it. Today's topic is emotional intelligence. Libby was on episode 95 last, so if you want to get an intro about her, the work that she does, learn more about just her as a person, former athlete and coach, refer to episode 95. But today's episode is about emotional intelligence, and we're gonna dive right into it. We've got a listener submitted question, so if you want to hear that, we'll be getting that to the end. So make sure you stick around for that. But yeah, emotional intelligence, tools to help with emotional intelligence and regulating emotions. So let's get right into it.
Perfect. So, emotional intelligence to me is one of the foundations of having a solid mental game, whether doesn't matter what sport you play, just in life, right? Like we all want to have high emotional intelligence because it impacts literally everything we do, right? Being able to manage your emotions, be self-aware, if you want to be dedicated to anything, have solid social skills, like it's really important. And that's one of the biggest things I work with my athletes is developing this because if you can have a strong sense of EIQ is like what we like to call it, then you can manage whatever kind of life throws your way, right? In the last episode, we talked about spheres of control, and that this is a big part of understanding what you can do and what you can control, and then kind of leaving the rest, right? Like keeping your focus honed in on things you personally can control. So to understand emotional intelligence, you first, or to develop it, you first have to understand what it even is. So, emotional intelligence is just the ability to recognize, understand, and manage your own emotions and to recognize and understand the emotions of others, right? We live in a social world. You don't do this in isolate, you don't live life in isolation. And so being able to understand yourself, but also understand how you impact environments, how you impact other people is really important. So there's five components of emotional intelligence. We're going to get into two of the big like heavy hitters, I think, in this episode. And then I know I'm coming back for another one about self-awareness, and that's a component as well. So the five components are self-awareness, self-regulation, dedication, empathy, and social skills. So today we're going to get into the regulation piece and the social skills piece. And part of social skills is empathy. And then there's a whole other episode on self-awareness. But to me, having self-regulation is necessary, but not sufficient to be emotionally intelligent. But I think it's one of the building block skills with self-awareness. Because if I don't understand myself and I don't understand how I feel, it's really hard for me to understand how I impact an environment, if that makes sense. Team dynamics, dynamics with coaches, my parents, my friends, whatever it might be. So being able to monitor and understand and regulate myself is really important. And this is important for athletes in particular because sports are emotional, right? In any given period or game, you could experience really high highs, really low lows, disappointment, frustration, um, humor, sadness, whatever it might be, right? Like, so you have to be able to monitor yourself in game so that your focus can remain on the impact you can have on the game, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so to get into building emotional awareness, you kind of have to again understand what it is, right? Like I always bring it back to the why with my athletes. And this is kind of part of that is like building the understanding to build the skills. So emotional awareness is understanding and identifying how you feel, and then understanding how your emotions can be used to solve your problems. And this is what I think stands in the way of not just athletes, but most people as we get really sucked into the emotion and we let the emotion dictate our next move rather than using more of our logical brain to interpret the emotion and move forward. Um, so the benefits of this are of having emotional awareness are immense for athletes, right? So if you have better self-regulation because you're more emotionally aware, you're better able to manage your feelings and not let them distract you from what your goals are or what you're trying to achieve on the ice, on the field, on the court, whatever sport you might play. You're going to improve your relationships, right? You want to be a coachable player, and being an emotionally intelligent player is going to make you more coachable, right? um, Not taking feedback personally, right? Understanding that if I have an emotional response to something my coach says, a lot of players will take that emotion and then they shut down, right? They take it personally or they get defensive or whatever it might be. And I'm sure you've probably seen this with coaching, right? Like there's some kids that take what you say as like really harsh criticism when that's not your intent.
Well, I experienced it every single time I'm on the ice coaching, but I
Yeah.
also can relate to it 100% as a former player. Like I look back and
Yeah,
I will admit this 100%. I took everything personally. Was
I did too.
I am a very emotional person, very passionate person, whatever. But that becomes to a point where it's detrimental, and I know that
Mm-hmm.
firsthand. But I want
Mm-hmm.
to ask you a question on that too. Like
Sure.
the best athletes are the ones that are able to kind of take the emotion out of it and just kind of like they talk about even keel, even keel. You want to stay high, not too low. Like all, but
Mm-hmm.
okay, great, right? Um, but that is true. Like the best athletes are the ones that are like they score a goal, make a great play. Yes, they allow themselves to be happy and celebrate that.
Sure.
But then they're like, okay, great. Like that was great. Now I got to get back to work. And then it's like when they make a mistake, maybe they do allow themselves, maybe, I don't know what your thoughts are, but, they allow themselves to kind of feel down about that or upset. But then they're like, whatever, I made a mistake. Instead of like ruminating on that, you allow yourself to feel that emotion for a bit and enjoy that or feel that
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
negative, and then you kind of go back to that normal instead of just like hanging on the highs for a week or hanging on the lows for a week, 2 weeks, and then really letting
Sure.
that drive the rest of everything, right? Like you want to just kind of remain right in that even sort of
Mm-hmm.
playing field, right? Level.
Yeah, and I think people who can do that, who are much more of like that even keel, are whether they know that for a fact or if it's just something they've accepted about life. But like the reality is that any emotional state, any of them, it's not permanent. You're not going to feel happy every moment of every day. You're not going to feel sad of every moment of every day. And so elite performers are able to say, like, I understand that this is a temporary sensation or experience I'm going to have. And then I come back to that place of center, right? Because that's what I feel more in control when I'm here versus if
Mm-hmm.
I'm up high or down low, right? And so, yeah, that is what you want. What I often see is those people, and we're going to get into this. This is how you develop the emotional awareness and the control, is not fearing certain emotions or not like I don't want to say I don't think it's also healthy to actively like pursue or seek out positive, and we'll get into why I don't like positive and negative either, but like you just have to be in the moment and experience life and know that that moment, whether it's positive or negative or disappointing or frustrating or happy, like that's going to fade and the process starts again, right? Score a goal on your last shift. There's still time left in the game. You have to like bring it back in and approach the next shift like that one didn't happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what am I going to control in this one to continue to make an impact on the game?
Mm-hmm.
That makes
Yeah,
sense.
100%. If okay, so I go out. I think scoring a goal and doing something positive, or I don't know, whatever word you like to use, like, something good.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
easy to, it's easy because now you can just be like, all right, I got to reset, and it's like you're in the perfect headspace to reset. But
Yeah.
for the athletes that are listening, um, for little Danny Perez growing up, who's just an absolute mental midget, what would you
Yes.
tell him? What would you tell him after making a really bad turnover, and now he's sitting back on the bench, and the rest of his game's going to get ruined? and then he's going to have a bad week of practice and have it happen next weekend again. What would you tell him in that moment if you could be in his brain and say
Yeah.
to give him a tool right after that shift where he makes a major mess up and it results in a
Yeah.
goal against?
Yes, this was also me as an athlete. So
Okay, perfect.
I
Good.
personally relate to this. I see this in most athletes I work with, right? Like that getting hung up on the mistake then derails and pulls your focus away from the rest of the game and maybe even bleeds over, like you said, into the next game or the next practice or whatever it may be. So the first thing I would say is you have to have a solid reset routine. So that's a skill you can have in the game, in practice, something you can be practicing all the time um, to use if you make a mistake. So a reset routine is a way for you to like dial in both your body and your mind into the present moment, right? You can't change what just happened, right? You make a turnover in the neutral zone and maybe the other team scored, right? You can't impact that anymore. You can only impact the current moment and going forward, right? So a reset routine is 3 steps. Find a physical cue that you can tell your body, like I'm shaking it off. I'm resetting my body to be back in this present moment. You know, it could be a stick tap. It could be one of the players I have, he doesn't tap his stick on the ice, he taps it on his like calf. Like that's his reset. So he maybe adjust your gloves or your helmet or whatever feels natural to you, right? Like some sort of physical cue. And then you pair that with a deep breath, like literally visualize blowing the last play away, like in and then on your exhale, you blow it away. You can't impact it anymore. It's gone. And then you have a verbal cue. So anything from like next play, best play, that's done, right? If you feel like you really get hung up on the pass and you need something that's like really targeted at that, that's done. I got this. Let's go. Or maybe it's something like, I have an athlete who you like sets, well, they all should be doing it, but like sets intentions before the game and like what they're focusing on. And so like moving their feet, like, so he says to himself, he does a stick tap, he does the deep breath, and he says, move your feet. It doesn't matter what it is. It's just that you consistently do it to reset your brain and your body to say, this is where I am. I can't stay in the past.
Okay.
So reset routine. The other thing is like you can do that in between plays. You can do that in between shifts, right? It doesn't matter. But like say a mistake happens and then now, your shift's over, you're back on the bench. You have a little more time than just resetting on the ice. Like you can thinking about that mistake in this moment in the game is not typically going to help you, right? You can reflect on a game, on a performance after. In fact, you should be, right? What went well, what didn't go well. You know, these are the mistakes I make. This is what I can do in practice to remedy that or whatever it might be. But like ruminating on that mistake in the game is not the time or the place. Right. It seems kind of counterintuitive because you're like, well, if I think about it, the next shift I won't. And it's like, well, you're no longer in the present moment. The game
Mm-hmm.
moves too fast for you to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It could be in between periods, maybe at the ice cut. Like maybe you're in the locker room and you want to think through things for a few minutes and then you want to move on. That's fine. But on the bench, on the ice, that is not the time for that.
Yeah. So it
That makes
sounds like with no, 100%. So it sounds like with the reset tools, right? Whatever that may
mm-hmm.
be, tapping your calf, tapping your stick on the bench, or
Yeah.
wiggling your toes, grabbing the stick, and then following that up with a breath. To me, what that sounds like is, and you mentioned it too here, the purpose of that is to get yourself back into the present moment, out of your
Yeah.
head and back into the present moment, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think it's important too because the next episode we'll talk about self-awareness here that we're going to
Yeah.
follow it up, and I think that's part of the self-awareness tool. Like, find what works for you.
Mm-hmm.
The goal, right, is self-awareness, or
Yeah.
sorry, the goal is getting back to the present moment. But you have to have that self-awareness to find what works for you to get
To
to
do that.
to get to that present moment. Because for me, it might be I need to touch my stick, wiggle my hands, and take that breath, and that gets me back. For you,
Right.
it might be, I don't know, like looking at counting how many players are on the ice or something,
Right.
like whatever works for you. But I just kind of wanted to make a point of that too, because that's something that I've been learning lately. It's like there's not a one
Yeah,
size fits all for any of these tools and stuff. You got to kind of do a little bit internal homework as well, right? And make sure that what you're
absolutely.
doing is what works for you, because what works for Libby might not work for me, and what works for
Right.
me might not work for you, vice versa. So,
Exactly. Exactly. And we'll get into that in self-awareness too, but that is a huge point. You have to find the thing that works for you. And
mhm.
that is something I think a lot of players struggle with, right? Like even just not even just on the mental side, but I think on like their physical development. They think that just because their buddy can do this certain stick handling or whatever, they're like really good at receiving passes and that, they have their own particular style on the ice. Like you have to be your own individual player too. And you have to know what your strengths are, right? I was listening to your episode with Vinny Maltz, and he was like, the idea that you have of yourself in your head, right? Is that actually based in reality? Like, it's not saying you can't get there. Like, you guys were talking about being a goal scorer or not. Like,
Mhm.
is that the reality of who you are as a player? Is that the reality of the role you play on this team? We have to base what we're doing in reality. Can we have dreams and aspirations and work towards being incorporating new things in our game? Yes. But like you got to build your confidence around the things that you can currently do
Mhm.
and find the thing that works for you and who you are as a player. That is part of that self-awareness too.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Um, cool. As far as anything emotional intelligence wise, tools, before we get into the question here, got anything else
Yeah.
to add for the listeners?
I think the biggest thing you have to understand about emotional intelligence is the typical narrative, right? And this is where I like the positive, negative. I don't like that, like naming your emotions that way because you have to understand that your emotions are just data, right? Like they're just information. We've taught a lot of kids like, oh, these are the good ones and these are the bad ones. And what do we do with things that are bad, right? We either judge ourselves for having the bad or we avoid them. And that's how we get stuck in anxiety or overwhelm or frustration is oh, I'm having this feeling. That's a bad one. I don't want to be having this feeling. So either I'm going to pretend it's not happening and I'm going to avoid it, which isn't solving my problem either, or I'm going to, judge myself for having the feeling. And then I get wrapped up in the judgment rather than, okay, I'm having this feeling. Why am I feeling that way? It's just information. It's just telling me I need to pay attention. That's what the physiological purpose of emotion is it's supposed to tell us that we need to pay attention to something. So we need to
Hmm.
figure out what it is. And then, okay, I'm feeling this way. What is in my control to bring me back to that neutral place?
Hmm.
Right. So the language I like is uncomfortable and comfortable. That's how I like to describe emotion, right? There are emotions that we are like, yeah, I'm comfortable here. I like to feel calm. I like to feel happy. I like to feel excited. But sometimes my excitement pulls away from my focus and I do still need to bring it back to, a more neutral place. And then there's uncomfortable emotions, right? It doesn't feel good to be angry. It doesn't feel good to be disappointed or sad, right? That feels uncomfortable to us. But if I start to see them as comfortable versus uncomfortable instead of good versus bad, I've already pulled out the judgment,
Hmm.
right? Nobody's judging you for feeling uncomfortable, right? I'm not going to judge myself for feeling uncomfortable. I just need to use that lens. Like if I shift that language,
Yeah,
then
I
I
like that.
now can pull the judgment away and say, I'm feeling uncomfortable. What's going to help me feel more comfortable in this moment? I'm feeling anxious about this game, feeling kind of uncomfortable, like I'm getting in my head about who we're playing and what line I'm on or whatever, right? What is in my control to bring me back to comfort? Okay, I need to make sure I dial in my pregame. I need to make sure that I'm, regulating my body. I need to make sure that I have a solid prep, right? Oh, or we have a tournament coming up and I'm feeling nervous about that. Maybe there's scouts or whoever is at the tournament. All right, the nerves tells me that this matters to me, right? So I get to, I want to put in the prep. If I still feel nervous, then I didn't prep enough, right? And
Hmm.
so it's just like using the emotions to solve your problem. That's how you build emotional awareness and regulate emotions when you don't avoid them, because that's typically what happens is like the typical positive, negative, good versus bad. Then we get sucked into the judgment and we get sucked into the emotion. And that's pulling our ability, right? It takes longer, if we ever get there, to process and move forward and solve our problem, because we've been the source of our own issue
Hmm.
at that point.
Yeah, I like the way that you reframed that and kind of allowed, I mean, it helped me just in that moment shift my perspective on it. Like immediately, it takes a bit of the weight off it when you
Yeah,
don't label it with a specific emotion. You're just like, I'm uncomfortable versus because it does take out like the good and bad. It sounds more neutral when you say something like, I am uncomfortable
right.
right now, or I'm feeling comfortable, or mostly with with the quote unquote negative emotions.
Sure.
It
Yeah.
takes away a bit of that power that the negative emotions can have if you just reframe it and say, I'm uncomfortable. So I think that's valuable. I'm going to take that and
Yeah.
utilize that for sure. Because again, like I reiterate all the time, this stuff is athletic based right now, but it's going to benefit you for the rest of your life outside of sport.
Yeah. So, the way that it's the language matters, the way that you talk to yourself and the way that you talk to yourself about these things. But as like parents listening, coaches listening, right? We impact that in kids, we impact that in other people. And so, like, I
Hmm.
used to work really heavily in schools, and like,
Hmm.
there's tons of like emotional regulation curriculum, and they label things as here are the good ones, here are the bad ones. Like, we as adults have to start to model and change that language for kids too, right? We can't expect them to do this either. So like they need, if you're listening, you've got a 10U player, like they're going to need your help with this,
Yep.
right? But if you start using that language, like looks like you're feeling really uncomfortable right now. What are you feeling? Right? That's how you build emotional intelligence, is talking about these things, working with these things. It's the same way you build any other athletic skill. There's instruction, there's modeling, there's practice, there's reps, and then you get your way towards comfortable like mastery, right?
Hmm.
Same thing. We just have to, I think people think with the mental side of things, it's like, oh, I'll just tell it, I'll tell it to an athlete once or twice and like it should sink in for them. And it's like, no,
Hmm.
you have to actively and consciously and consistently practice these skills. And that's
Hmm.
where I think we struggle a lot, is that we try to pull the emotion out of it, right? And when we talked about mental toughness too, it's like we avoid talking about emotion with our athletes sometimes because we just want them to do the thing we need them to do in practice or in a game. And it's like the emotion is the driver behind this,
Hmm.
right? And so I think, you have to realize that like confidence isn't going to be built in comfort. You personally, as a coach, as a parent, have to realize that if this makes you uncomfortable to talk about emotions, there's work to be done there, right?
Yep.
To build mastery, to build confidence around this topic. And the kids are going to learn from that. They're going to model
Correct.
that.
Yeah. Well, that's
Yeah.
awesome stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've learned a lot just from that. So I appreciate the insight because now I
Yeah.
can kind of now be a better person myself and then hopefully model that differently for the athletes that I work in
Sure.
front of. I think this stuff is so valuable for both the athlete, the parent, the coach. So
Yeah.
that's awesome stuff, and thank you.
Yeah.
All right, we got our question. So our question is it's more like a like not framed fully question mark. It's like how to keep slash maintain a positive team environment during a losing season.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, this is a huge part of emotional intelligence, again, is that social skills piece, right? To understand that you impact the environment as much as the environment impacts you. And so, thinking about a team dynamic when things are going well, it's easy to get along with everybody, right? For the most part, right? That level of frustration, that level of tension is not as high. When things aren't going well, that increases the emotional responsiveness in an environment. And so again, like anything, my answer typically is like bring it back. What are you contributing? What are you controlling in this environment? If the team is having a rough season, right? There's like, how are you impacting that on a physical execution component? But then, like, what kind of attitude are you bringing to the field, to the rink, to the locker room, whatever, right? Like, you have to be emotionally aware enough to say, yeah, I'm super frustrated about, we're in a slump, we're on a slide, we're not winning. That doesn't feel great, but I have to understand that in sports there are winners and there are losers every time, right? And so this is going to help me grow, and building those relationships with my teammates is part of that. So what kind of attitude am I bringing to the team dynamic? What about that can I control? Right? I'm not saying you have to walk in there and be like super happy and happy go lucky but like a productive presence,
Mm-hmm.
right? It doesn't have to be overly positive, but it's got to be productive, right? Getting on your teammates for mistakes, they know they made a mistake,
Yep.
right? Like holding each other accountable, there's a fine line between that and just kind of being, you know, mean
Yeah.
sometimes, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like they get it. They made a mistake. They get it. And the thing is that like the same thing that we talked about, like with like elite athletes is like, yeah, they hold each other accountable, but they don't take a lot of that personal either,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like there's that fine line between, I'm going to hold myself to a standard. I also hold my teammates to a standard. But like I was watching a clip of like Sidney Crosby, and I can't remember who took the shot. They missed or whatever. And the whole bench is like, oh my God, we should have scored that. And he's like, whatever, dude, we'll get another one. Like he knows. He knows he
Yep.
messed up.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen that video?
I have. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like that's what leadership is. So, like in a team dynamic, when it's not going your way, are you going to step up and be a leader? Or are you going to be the guy that's like, oh my God, man, you should have made that shot? Or like, that was horrible. They scored on us, right? Like, what are you bringing to the environment?
Yeah. I
Is it
remember seeing
productive?
that clip. That clip. Someone like made a comment like, and I think I forget who it was, stood up and was like, "We've all messed up before," something along those lines.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because with the kids that I coach, I see it all the time, and
Yeah.
it's like you do think that these things kind of go away when players
Right.
reach a certain age or level, and then
No.
it sounds like a lot of the young kids that I coach what that exchange sounded like. And
Yeah.
it's kind of funny how, like, you're the best in the world calling someone else out for that. Um,
Mhm.
and these things still kind of like they don't go away unless you really nip them in the butt or at a young age, which is like super important to do, which is why it's important to have a lot of coaches that know this stuff at a young age, because you let that stuff fly for so long, it just
Right.
continues to compound and grow, and then it never goes away, and they keep doing it.
Right. Well, and there are professional athletes too that I think struggle. I mean, I don't know them personally, but I've seen like
Yep.
clips and different things of like people who can be pretty negative on the bench, and then they start to internalize that, and then like I my biggest example of this is like the Maple Leafs. Like they have so much amazing talent on their team, but like if you watch some of the clips of their dynamics on the bench, like you can see it. You can see the tension
Mm-hmm.
that happens in games. And like I would take a team that has more cohesiveness and maybe a little less talent. They're going to outperform longevity wise a team with stacked with talent that doesn't have a solid team environment
Yep.
all day, every day. And
Correct.
so, and you can't control what your teammates do, but you can control what you do. So, what are you bringing? What kind of energy are you bringing? What kind of, how are you giving your teammates constructive criticism? How are you holding them accountable? Like we talked, language matters. The way
Mm-hmm.
you say things matters.
Yep. Yeah. No, that's awesome stuff. And but the one thing that has been instrumental for me that I've learned going off of what you're saying is just like the two things that you can control is your effort and your attitude, and
Yeah.
that kind of simplifies because you're able to just instead of worrying about so many different things, you're able to worry about two things now, and
Yeah.
that's control your effort, your attitude.
Well, and I think you bring up a great point. It's simple. It's not always easy, right?
Mm.
Because we get that we get reinforcement from outside sources, people who maybe aren't as like this is just the way it's done. Like that gets reinforced to us. Like you said, it's you got to nip this stuff in the bud early with kids. Like I am a huge proponent that this kind of work, mindset work, emotional intelligence, there is not a kid too young, and there's not a kid that's not at a high enough level to learn this stuff. This is for literally everybody. And like my biggest thing with this is that regardless of how far you make it, these are skills you need for life. You want to have successful relationships as an adult, emotional intelligence. You want to be successful in whatever you pursue as a career, emotional intelligence, right? You have to know yourself. You have to know how you impact environments. You got to take accountability, have dedication. Like these are skills for life. Sports is just a great way to learn it because kids love it,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
So I think that's a big part of it too. Simple, not always easy.
Correct. That's the key. It is simple for us to talk about it, and then who knows? In like 3 hours, I'll be thrown into the fire and completely have a
Yeah.
melt. We'll see. But um,
Yeah.
for right now, I'm perfect at this, which is great. So
Perfect.
yeah. All right, cool. Well, that's I think that's all we got for today on this
Yeah.
episode, and then yeah, we'll go over self-awareness and go over that in the next one, and yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Perfect.
tuning in, and yeah, I'm excited to have you back on.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.